my pleasure. They gave me this wonderful opportunity to be able to introduce our friends from NatGeo. So I'm going to introduce Lauren Jenkins. She is the Vice President of Scout Comms and is going to be moderating our panel today. So give Lauren and our friends from NatGeo a warm welcome.
Good afternoon, and thank you for coming to this session. Really excited to really introduce you to The Long Road Home and some of the men behind the series and the event that inspired what we're about to see and what we're about to talk about. A little background on The Long Road Home, the mini-series event. It's an 8-episode event that will premiere with a special 2-hour episode on Tuesday, November 7th, 8 Central. And the series will air Tuesdays at 9 Central. So mark your calendars, prepare to be seated, on your couch or in bed with your iPad, ready to stream and watch and enjoy this upcoming series. The Long Road Home is based on reporter Martha Raddatt's book about the battle that took place on April 4th, 2004, of the same name, The Long Road Home. And it relives a fight for survival during the Iraq War when the 1st Cavalry Division from Fort Hood, Texas, was ambushed on April 4th, 2004, in Sadr City, Baghdad, a day that became known as Black Sunday. The series is a scripted series that cuts between the action on the battlefield and also what was taking place at home. So I think, with the audience we have here, many of you being military family members and veterans yourselves, I think each of you will see some part of your experience in the show. And that's what we're really excited about. The show takes place over 8 episodes, as we mentioned, and the battle itself took place over 8 hours and 7 minutes, and the cost of the mission was clear. It took the lives of 8 Americans and 65 more were wounded. All who survived, including the families of the fallen, carry scars, visible and invisible, that will last a lifetime. So let me introduce you to some of the men who are behind the series and who will be discussing the series with us. To my immediate right on your left, is Mikko, Alanne, who is the showrunner, screenwriter, and executive producer of The Long Road Home. He's a documentary filmmaker based in Los Angeles, and before The Long Road Home, Alanne wrote the Chilean minor rescue drama The 33, starring Antonio Banderas and Juliette Binoche, released by Warner Brothers. And Mikko has numerous projects in development at major studios and networks that we've probably all heard of, including West with the Night for Angelina Jolie at Warner Brothers and the Chilean dissident thriller The Dictator's Shadow at Phoenix Pictures. Mikko's already also written an adaptation of John Meacham's New York Times bestseller, Franklin and Winston, slated to star Sir Anthony Hopkins as Winston Churchill. And then to our right is Eric Bourquin. I practiced that and everything. Eric Bourquin, as Army veteran and soldier involved in the battle on April 4th, 2004, and was a production consultant with The Long Road Home. Eric's Dallas native, was born here, and was raised all over Central Texas. He enlisted in the U.S. Army in 1998 and went on to train as an infantryman. After arriving at Fort Hood, Texas in April 2001, Bourquin went on to serve in the 1st Cavalry Division and 1st Infantry Division in various leadership positions and completed 3 combat deployments in support of the global war on terror in Afghanistan and Iraq. After medically retiring in 2013, Bourquin has spent his time focusing on his wife and family, healing, helping others, and enjoying new experiences, including being a production consultant. And then we have Aaron Fowler, another U.S. Army veteran who was involved in the battle and served as a production consultant on The Long Road Home. Born in San Diego, California, which I always like to see, more Californians here. Grew up, all over, which I think some of you could probably, and your children can probably relate to, Colorado, Massachusetts, Arizona, and enlisted in the Army in October 1997 as an infantryman. His first duty assignment was in Mannheim, Germany, and he participated in several NATO training deployments throughout Eastern Europe, and a real-world deployment to Albania in preparation and support to the crisis in Kosovo. After that, Aaron went to Fort Lewis, where he was for the initial fielding of the Stryker, before arriving in Fort Hood in April 2003 to serve in the 1st Cavalry Division, and he completed 3 combat deployments to Baghdad, totaling 39 months of combat overseas. Upon medically retiring in 2012, Aaron spending his time focusing on his family and enjoying the outdoors, and occasionally working in television. I think now that we've met some of these gentlemen, we'll take a look at the long road home, and then dive into their experiences overseas and working on the show.
All Comanche Reds, Red 1, keep your eyes open, boys. Over.
Guys, see what I'm seeing?
Where the hell is everyone? Hold position, over.
Ambush!
Comanche 6, this is Red 1, we are in contact, over. I know you're upset, but we talked about this, right? Look, okay, it's a little like football. I'm the team captain, and now it's time for us to go play in the big game.
But you've never been to war before.
Kiss the kids for me. Two vehicles down. I repeat, we need immediate evac. Over. Copy that, Red 1. Help is on the way.
Gentlemen, this is a skilled and highly prepared enemy who has coordinated a citywide attack.
We have a Christmas tree!
Since I'm not going to be here for Christmas this year, I thought maybe we could celebrate early.
A platoon's been attacked.
I am anxious. We are all so anxious.
I don't see any hostiles. Maybe it's over.
No. Now they're just regrouping.
I promised I'd get them back safe. Promised all of them.
I'm gonna need all of this to come back.
Everybody rebound!
Thank you, Lord, for all my wonderful blessings. Bless them for their sacrifice.
Get in! Back up, back up, back up! I just gotta go over there. I gotta go help some people.
Why?
Those guys in my platoon, they're my family too.
All right. Well, Mikko, I think we'll start with you. A lot of the folks here in this room have seen a lot of military movies and television shows over the years. What makes The Long Road Home different?
Well, I think what struck me when I first read the book, just to give you a little background, I have been trying to bring The Long Road Home to the screen for 9 years. Mike Medavoy, who's one of our producers, who you may know, is a Hollywood icon. He was a studio head of a couple of different studios and has been involved in some of the most impressive films ever made, from Apocalypse Now to Platoon to Silence of the Lambs. And Mike and I had worked on a television pilot together at NBC, and he knew that I was really drawn to important real-life stories, and he sent me the book. And it really was one of those things that I fell in love with it from the first moment. I read it in one sitting, and what I think was astonishing is that when you look at a lot of Hollywood productions about the military, so many of them tend to be about elite forces and super soldiers, and you never really get to know the men, you just get to know the mission. I joke that the only thing you get to see soldiers do besides fight is work out in a lot of Hollywood productions. And what Martha's book did that was so remarkable is that you get such an intimate view into the real lives of soldiers, the soldiers who actually make up the vast majority of our armed forces. And I just fell in love with all the soldiers and families, and just felt like the story has to be told. It was one of those things where I felt like I really personally understood for the first time what it's really like to go to war, not just for the soldier, but for the military family. We talk a lot about the bravery and sacrifice of our military families, but I just don't think people have any idea what it's like.
And Eric and Aaron, for you, was this very different working on this series than maybe some of the movies and television shows you'd seen before?
I have just a little bit of experience with film. It was mainly as an extra, where you get treated kind of like a private in the Army. And to see, like, my very first day that I was invited to the production office in Austin, it was a unique moment when I go in, and it's like this whole building had been converted into a museum of one day of my unit frozen in time, with everything from our vehicle task organization lists, our patrol rosters, and to be able to see probably 80 people hard at work, just detailing every possible detail of that day. I was just flabbergasted when I went in and saw the dedication and care that was being put into the project. And initially, I was worried. I was scared. You know, this is a very important story to me. It entails the loss of some of my friends. And I was hesitant. But when I saw the way that the production team was taking to it, I instantly fell in love with everybody and was willing to bare my soul, to share what I could, to make sure that the film would be as accurate as possible, because of the way that I saw that they were reverently treating the story.
For me, in the beginning, it wasn't very difficult at all. I've told the story about Mikko before, and it's a little bit of backstory on him. He used to work at the National Institute for...
Show Foundation. Sorry, I have a mic. You can keep that.
Dirt.
I used to work at the Survivors of the Shoah Visual History Foundation, which is an oral history archive that Steven Spielberg founded to collect testimony from 50,000 Holocaust survivors around the world.
So once he'd explained to me what he was doing, he pretty much showed me how much empathy that the man had and was able to apply that to our story. It made it easier for me to open up and try to, explain to him some of the events that happened, surrounding me and just surrounding all the events that were taking place. Being on set and actually working with it, to caveat what Aaron was saying, it's been an incredibly healing experience. So it hasn't been difficult at all. It's been beneficial. It's difficult going through it, but being on the other side of it, being able to see something tangible that I'll be able to show my children, that other people will be able to identify with and to be able to understand it, because, the TV show is it's not a war film at all. In my opinion, it's a love story. It's a family story, it's a human story. And everybody will be able to identify, regardless of if they're the guy in the truck or if they're the person back at home watching this, because the feelings that it elicit will make you feel that. So I don't know if that was easy or hard, but it definitely felt good.
Well, and Eric and Aaron, you both are obviously very committed family men, and you mentioned your families and the love. You feel this is a love story, and we see in the trailer and the episodes, when you get a chance to see them firsthand, that it's very much about not just what happens overseas, but what also happens at home. How were your families involved in the production and the consulting alongside yourselves?
My wife got to come on set a little bit and answer some of the questions that some people had, which was a unique experience for her. Because I don't think too many people have stopped to ask the spouses, what was your experience? What was it like waiting for a phone call? How did you take your husband's casualty notification? That's a part of the story that not too many people have seen, and I think it was refreshing for my wife to be able to open up and share some of that with some people for the first time.
My wife, she'd got to come down to the set too, and she's now being exposed to a lot more of the story, just because now I'm a lot more willing to talk about it. She was able to definitely have access to be able to speak and tell people how it was. She identifies a lot too, and just speaking with her about how the families are relating to it, and she can understand that, hey, this is my story and how it feels. And so listen, it's making her emotional in the same way the combat scenes are making me emotional. It's something that's easy to identify with.
And Mikko, what was your experience like bringing these people on set and helping them open up about what they had experienced and putting that on screen?
I mean, my sort of approach to it was always my dream that we would be able to use people's real names and do only the requisite dramatization that was necessary to adapt it for an 8-hour series. One of the things, just to share with you what is unique structurally about the show is that a lot of war stories begin with people say goodbye, then they're at war, and then they come back. And that's not this story. We sort of reset the clock. Each hour, we see the events of that hour through a particular family's point of view. So we return to the past to kind of meet them and see what different couples are struggling with. So I had a policy on set that it was basically open to all veterans and family members to visit at any point. And we had a very, that's just the way fate played out. We were filming the goodbye scenes at Cooper Field, where the soldiers all deployed from, on April 4th, which was the 13th anniversary of Black Sunday. And a lot of veterans come to Fort Hood, obviously, to commemorate the occasion already, but there was something so meaningful and deeply haunting to me to have a lot of the real-life families meet the actors who are portraying their sons or husbands, or some people got to meet their counterparts. And I do think that we had a really unique production where these bonds were formed between the actors and soldiers and families that I think will endure for the rest of their lives. And I think for me, I remember the first time even just meeting some of the soldiers in the story, Shane Aguero. I don't know what I thought a young lieutenant would be like, but we discovered that we were both big sci-fi geeks and loved Star Wars. We tend to end up talking about Star Wars a lot when we see each other. And Troy Denemy, whom Jason Ritter plays in the story, you think again, like coming to this to a degree as an outsider. I'm from Finland originally, and I did serve in the Finnish Defense Forces for a year. So I have a little bit sort of background in understanding what regular Army life is like. But this was some of my first time ever meeting American soldiers. And Troy was just such an incredibly warm guy. And I remember him and his wife, Gina, what they mostly talked about how difficult the separation was for them. They had been married for several years. The longest they had ever been apart was 2 weeks. They had just had a baby, literally days before. And that was the majority of our conversation. I just thought, this is such an incredible human story that everyone can relate to. And it was my sort of ambition that, no matter where people were politically, in this country, I felt this about the book too. Everyone is going to care about the story and our soldiers and our troops, because no one has ever really allowed the American public to get to meet them with this level of intimacy, I think.
And Eric and Aaron, and to that point, when you got on set, when you started working with Mikko and some of the other folks in the production, did you find that you had to readjust a lot of perceptions or, point out the wrong camo, or was this a really sophisticated kind of set where you found you were able to dive deeper into the issues?
It was absolutely phenomenal. The level of detail and research that these people put into their production was phenomenal. We didn't really have to correct a whole lot of things. A lot of things that I worked with were period-specific things, including the gear that we wore while we were there and the weapons we were carrying, and trying to make sure we represent the characters as accurately as possible, because the majority of these guys are still alive, and they're going to be able to see that, hey, that's not how I kept my optic. That's not where I wore my canteen pouch. But I'm hoping that they'll be able to see it and it'll be as true to form as possible. There wasn't a whole lot of having to redo it more. My mind was blown because of they had 5 different types of, sand to mimic the different types of areas they'd been through. Seth Reed, the art director, he really did his homework. They went to Morocco, to Jordan, just all over the place, trying to make sure that they could get the details down to make it look as authentic as possible.
I think mostly it was translating work. They had a pretty good idea of what they wanted, but the costume department, trying to get everything right for the uniform, at first I just sent them AR-670-1, but I might as well have sent the Rosetta Stone, and then I realized when I sat down with them that, okay, here, let me collate this down into a much smaller piece. But yeah, a lot of the equipment, it's amazing how hard it is to get that across to anybody, let alone a civilian, or to find it on eBay or obscure radios and little pieces of equipment. But other than trying to translate military speak into something that civilians could grasp, these guys were already ahead of it. They had a lot of homework done, and it was just massaging the finer details to be correct.
And Mikko, I understand you had a lot of, you worked with the Army quite a bit. You filmed pretty much almost the entire thing at Fort Hood. Can you talk?
Everything, yes.
Yes. Can you talk a little bit more about how that partnership really help?
Yeah, I mean,
make
I
this?
feel like ever since I visited Fort Hood, and actually Eric took me, my first sort of in-depth tour of Fort Hood was with Eric. And I remember parts of it just feel like you're in a kind of a Pleasantville type small town until suddenly you cross a road and there's miles and miles of fighting vehicles and tanks and it was just mind-blowing. And I just thought, wouldn't it be astonishing to give the American public an inside view of what life on a military base is actually like? So initially the idea was that we would shoot all the home front scenes in the actual homes, actual chapels, actual family readiness center for maximum authenticity. But then we realized that we were obviously not going to be staging the battles in Sadr City itself, that no one would ensure that, nor could we afford to do that. And so the question then became, where would we build Sadr City? And I just want to commend National Geographic. You could not ask for more incredible partners when you say, well, we're going to have to build Sadr City for a miniseries. There will not be a season 2. This will be a one-time thing. And to have them say, yes, let's build 80 buildings. Let's recreate the main avenue in Sadr City, the alley, the actual building where the platoon found refuge as an indoor-outdoor set, and let's refacade the other buildings. What's unique about sort of, again, thematically about our show is that we built Sadr City on the mount site where these guys trained before leaving for Iraq. So I think there was an extra level of perhaps surreality of coming to find Sadr City emerged there. So anyway, so Fort Hood, everyone there was incredibly enthusiastic from the very beginning. General Thompson, because it's such a personal story for them, they said yes right away, and then it just became a matter of there's a complex bureaucracy to having the Army become involved. They rarely say yes to projects, but I think everyone felt that this was very special and meaningful and important. So they were amazing partners. I joke about, in the beginning, Lieutenant Colonel Tim Hyde was our primary liaison from Los Angeles, and he was the first person to read the scripts for comments for accuracy. And I will confess that some of my radio protocol was not correct. But now I'm that guy. When I watch other military dramas, I'm like, wrong. Where's the headgear? So, and of course, Eric and Aaron also helped tremendously. I mean, it's one of those rare opportunities you have when you're telling a real-life story that you can actually ask the person who was there, is this right? If not, how can we change that? So it was an incredible partnership to do that, both with the Army, Fort Hood, and the veterans of this battle.
To caveat what Mikko's talking about with the Army, one of the things that I was very, very impressed with is there was, on different days, we'd have upwards of 80 to a different 100 soldiers, still active duty soldiers that would come down and be extras on the set and help lend to the authenticity. And they were manning the vehicles, they were parts of the crew, and just to have people that are currently serving to be working so hard on a story that happened before them, it was humbling because, they're actually helping, tell our story, and they're still part of the story. So it comes back full circle, like training where we've trained at before, and then to film at the same time.
And to that point, how did you approach that sort of educational aspect? These current service members who maybe weren't even in the military at the time that the battle took place. How did you approach, telling other service members who might have similar experiences or who might have to be training for future ambushes like this, about your experience in Sadr City?
That's a really good, tough one. I've learned throughout my time that the more open I am with the experience, the more I talk about it, the easier it gets, and it might help other people with it. And the only thing that I can say in order to, prepare you for an ambush is just continue to train. Do your basics. There's nothing really that can prepare you for being in an ambush. You train prior to it, and you develop SOPs and ways to react to them, but there's just no advice that I personally could give someone to help them prepare for it.
It was cool to be able to answer some of the questions the younger soldiers had, but I think honestly I learned more from the younger generation than they picked up from us. It was such a cultural shift. I retired in 2012, Eric retired in 2013, and go back on Fort Hood and to see junior soldiers from 2-5 Cav, our unit, which one we were in was all male, Now we have a female Bradley driver that had to hide her hair up underneath her helmet because she's playing a soldier. And then a female tank lieutenant was there, and I'm just quietly in the back listening. And one of her soldiers asked her, ma'am, what's this story about? Oh, a bunch of crunchies got themselves in trouble, and some tankers had to go bail them out. And I'm just laughing in the back of my head that, like, yes, go get him. Here's a young female lieutenant. The Army has changed so much that, like, I hardly even recognize it anymore. But to see the next generation well prepared and spinning up and supporting us, it was a comfortable feeling to have.
May I mention something else? We also made a concerted effort to, beyond having extras, in hiring veterans where we could for different parts. Like you'll see in episode 1, the military chaplain in our story is an actual Fort Hood military chaplain and Sutter City deployment veteran. The casualty notification officers are actual casualty notification officers. We had, I'm trying to remember other parts. There's an old vet, and one of the houses that we rented for filming, we discovered that the owner was a first cap vet. We had an old vet part, and we cast him. So there's something, combat, our flight medics were actual flight medics. I felt like, why hire actors when people who actually do this job can do it on screen for us? And it was just added another layer of authenticity, I think, to the production.
That reminded me of Bill Young and David Vasquez. They're actually playing soldiers on Sergeant Miltenberger's truck. So these guys are actual members of the unit and of the platoons involved. And I don't know where they found the wherewithal to actually be able to handle that level of responsibility and be able to, recreate that event over and over, knowing how near and dear it was to so many people. But it's amazing, and it just the amount of vets that turned out. There's just so many actually in the production. It was pretty refreshing.
And to your point about authenticity, and how did you work on balancing that narrative that we talk about a lot, I know, in our community, of showing empowering stories about veterans and military families, with also depicting the sometimes challenging and uncomfortable parts about the military experience and military family experience?
Well, I felt like, just like when I read Martha's book, I felt like I started to really understand what the experience of war is really like. I think Hollywood tends to, in a lot of films and TV shows, it becomes about the glossy visuals and fancy camera moves versus, again, conveying what the actual experience is like. I would actually like to show, we have a clip. This is the start of the ambush in episode 1, just to give you a sense of how we do it, because listening to veterans describe what it was like and just the chaos and terror of it, I wanted to really convey all those things. I asked a lot of veterans, like, if there's one aspect of your story that you would like us to feature, tell me what it is. And a lot of those stories were very hard, and I think everyone was just very committed to giving an accurate portrait to people of what it is really like out there versus what Hollywood shows. So if we can show the, this is the beginning of the ambush in the first one.
Where the hell is everyone? Whoa, whoa. Listen. Was that?
Comanche Reds, this is Red 4. We have contact. Looks like a lone shooter moving to isolate. Over.
All Comanche Reds, Red 1, hold and move to Red 4's position. Over. Come on, Rydell, get us back. Come on, go, go. Mike, this is Comanche Red 1.
We have received fire. Route Delta, just south of the Sauter Bureau. Over.
Red 1, Comanche 6. What type of fire? Over.
Comanche 6, unclear. Over.
got him! I got him! Get in! Everybody rebound!
6, this is Red 1. We have renewed contact, over.
Red 1, how heavy is the contact? Over.
What?
How heavy is your contact? Over.
Really damn heavy. We're in a complex ambush. Everyone's in. Go! Rydell, come on. Go, go!
So I wanted to show that it was always my hope that we could try to put the audience in a seat in one of those Humvees, be on the home front with the families. About 30% of our show takes place on the home front, and much like if anyone here has read Martha's remarkable book, what I loved about it from the beginning is that you leave Iraq and go to the home front and you follow the different threads, and I really wanted to mirror that structure in the series. So hour by hour, you get to live through what it's really like. And one thing which so struck me about the story is that, correct me if I'm wrong, but no one in the unit had ever really been under fire before, had ever fired at an enemy. I mean, there have been some soldiers who had been deployed during the first Gulf War, but they had been away from the action. So there is, watching people cope with the shock of what was supposed to be a peacekeeping mission on day 4, it was fascinating to hear the reflections on it. And I did want to say something else too, which is, I struggled a lot with how to end the series because, as I said, so many stories end with homecomings. And that was not the story for this unit. This was day 4, and I think a lot of civilians would be startled to find out that it wasn't like, well, that was terrible, now you get to come home. No, day 4 is followed by day 5, that's followed by day 6, that's followed by a year of deployment. So we wanted to make that the ending too, so that people really understood what that was like. Even in the wake of, these terrible casualties, there is, I think what inspired me was the idea that, because it was a peacekeeping mission, the unit did not have any of the heavy equipment or armor that traditionally accompanies soldiers to war zones. So guys would again and again go on exposed trucks, on unarmored Humvees to try to save their brothers. And that's something, Mike Baumgarten, who's one of our tech advisors, I remember when on the first day that the actors began training, he asked them, who in this room has someone who'll take a bullet for them? And not a single actor obviously raised their hands. And he said, I can name at least 30 guys. And that's what I really wanted to convey with the series, is the bond between soldiers that makes people do the impossible over and over again.
I would just like to add this story about the bond. This man right here was shot 3 times in 3 separate firefights in one long engagement on that day on April 4th to come out and get me. Me and all of our friends. And if that's not a bond, I don't know what it is, because he knew I was out there, he knew we knew what we were training for. But at the first bullet wound, he didn't stop. At the second one, he didn't stop. The only reason he stopped at the third one because he'd already bandaged up everybody else that was in the truck. You'll get a good, you'll be able to see some of the heroic things that he did, and there's just so many stories throughout this of things that men did that, it's had to been wrapped up and it's hard to tell everything. But I like to make sure I get to tell everybody every now and then and make sure he knows how much I appreciate it. So thank you, Aaron.
Well, I'm going to ask one final question myself, and then I will turn it over to the audience for questions. So definitely start thinking about what you want to ask these gentlemen right now. But I think what struck me having the privilege of watching the first episode was truly the realism and the professionalism displayed in the show, in that you don't see, irrational actions. You see men behaving as they were trained to do. And I think that is sadly something you don't see too often in Hollywood dramas and dramatizations. Did you find yourself having to fight for the fact that it's dramatic and enough and heroic enough as it is, or was it something that you had a lot of backing on?
No, National Geographic was an amazing partner in that I said from the very beginning that I wanted to tell the story with as little dramatization as possible, where I felt like I only wanted to add such pieces that would impart a deeper understanding to the audience about the conflict, about the characters. So we would take things that are maybe universally true for military families, may not have happened to this particular family on this particular day, but certainly would have happened at some point, or events that took place, say, the preceding Tuesday or the following Wednesday, and put them all into that one day. But it was very important to me, I know that when people watch this and they see people's names on screen, including the real-life soldiers and families, they assume what you're telling them is true. Yes, it carries a disclaimer and says that this is a dramatized retelling, but people still expect it to be, and it should be, essentially true. So I felt so fortunate that everything that we wanted to do, National Geographic, things that were huge, ambitious things that were small but very important things, they will always had our back 100%.
Great, thank you. All right, now the pressure's on. It's your turn. Up here, up in front.
I know that you mentioned between Hollywood and everything else, and authenticity seems to be Thank you. So I know authenticity seems to be a very huge subject for what this is, and Hollywood seems to miss that quite a bit in war reenactments, and it's only going to keep coming as this war is now becoming so many years old. How do you feel like there is the disconnect, and why? I mean, you as a producer, as yourself, and not even, you're not American one, but where is the disconnect? And it's this may be giving an idea to someone else, but to create almost a committee that forces Hollywood to make this authenticity. I know Bradley Cooper, being a huge star, made a big point that he said after doing American Sniper that that's one of his missions, is to make sure that any future war films that he participates in would be. So, where would you say the disconnect is?
I think that it comes down to the integrity of the individual filmmakers. I remember Mike Baumgarten, who was one of our principal tech advisors, who was himself a 10-tour Army Ranger. He said we are the first production where he would give advice and say, when we would start blocking scenes, and say, actually what we should be doing here is this, and we would change it to make it authentic. I don't know why anyone would choose to make something inauthentic.
Because it's sexy and it sells. It looks good on screen. I'll be 100% honest with you. But that's one of the things about this. It looks legitimate and authentic because the people were putting their hearts behind it, and it helped that a lot of people are still around. There's always going to be small inaccuracies due to budget, or the explosion is going to be bigger than real life. The only way you'll know that is if you're shooting explosives, and you'll see that they're not really that big. But that's what draws people in, and I can understand that. But it's the emotion behind it that they've been able to convey by the way they've done it that makes it so beautiful in a way that, big explosion doesn't bother me. So.
How is it just not another war story? This I'm blown away by, absolutely. So how do you make it not another war story?
Have you seen any of it yet? Have you seen anything other than the clips?
These clips.
Just these clips? So, I think you'll see after you see one of the episodes, you'll understand that it's not a war movie, it's a human story, because you'll be able to identify with no matter what character it is, be it one of the soldiers, be it a family member, you'll be able to understand because the way they conveyed and articulated the emotions, and they're showing it. I could not see it being lumped in with a war flick. It's just not one of those things. But I hope you see it.
Just to tell you, my process was that I wanted to speak with as many veterans as possible, beyond reading Martha's book and having access to all of Martha's interviews, just so that where we had questions or where there were aspects that were unknown, why not ask the person? Why make something up? And I feel like a lot of the stuff in our show feels uniquely real because it is real. And I encouraged my writing staff to reach out to the real life people and ask them when they had questions. We consulted the families. Even on the day, we would have a question in a scene, or actors would speak with their counterparts. I remember Kate Bosworth, who plays Gina Denemy. They talked quite a bit before she arrived in Fort Hood, and she would say, "Oh, Gina told me this fascinating story," even stories that I may not have heard before. And she said, "Could we include that, or I think that would be important, or in this scene, could we change this to reflect it?" So I feel like not just myself, but every single person in the story became incredibly committed to the real life people and getting it right. I've said this before, but I truly feel like Martha, in telling the story, rescued it from being lost to history, rescued all these people from being lost to history, because no one knew in that moment just how significant April 4th, 2004 would be. And I feel like myself and everyone in this production, from our producers to cast and crew, are really carrying forward the work that Martha began.
Yes, and I think from the business side, the more we can support films and shows like this that depict the kinds of stories we want to see, the more we can encourage other producers to also tell really compelling and authentic stories. And I know Rory one of my colleagues sits on the 6 certified board for Got Your 6, which is looking to really highlight movies and TV series and even a Broadway show that depict the military experience in an authentic way. So I think the more we can support those people who are doing it the right way, the more we can encourage others to follow their steps.
And we have our final 2 questions back here.
Hi, I'm Kaylin. I'm actually here representing Veterans in Film and Television, which will soon be called Veterans in Media and Entertainment. And my question is for the veterans. Now that you've been working with such a cool production, has it opened up your eyes to this field, and would you ever consider doing more projects like this? Has it caused you to have any type of aspirations in this career field now?
Oh, absolutely. When I retired, I actually got a little bit of extra work after listening to a radio advertisement on Post. And then I got my toe in the pool, and I was like, hey, this isn't too bad. This is pretty neat. They pay you to sit around and eat, and, I like that. And then actually working on this set, and being a part of the production, I think it's amazing. Being a technical advisor is the closest thing to being a sergeant first class that I'll ever get a chance to be again. So I can be anal retentive and point out details. So it's perfect for me. I'm hoping to actually get a chance to do more of it. I enjoyed it.
I loved it. I'm not going to lie. There's so many different things. Does anybody know what an ager dyer is? Anybody ever heard that term? I didn't either before I saw the movie industry. They put a mustard stain on the uniforms to make it look as authentic, because I'm horribly messy, and they rolled with it and did it all. The other jobs that are in there, it's amazing all the different things you can do and how well it correlates with my military experience. They're very, very similar in an organized chaos type of way, and just some of the things I've seen them accomplish, I wouldn't be able to accomplish with a company at the same time. So it was pretty refreshing, and I'm looking forward to any other work that comes along that way.
I definitely recommend for any vets that might be interested, the film industry is actually set up almost exactly like the military in the organization and the planning process. So if you're having a hard time adjusting to civilian life, look at the film industry. They speak just like us, act just like us, and swear just like us too.
But maybe more dysfunctional than the Army, though.
It's a real smooth transition. I enjoyed doing it.
Hey, gentlemen, thank you for your service and thank you for sharing your story. I'm Dan Dwyer. I'm the founder of Vet2Biz Life. And the group in front of you are, if not today, certainly tomorrow's most inspiring veteran entrepreneurs and male-spouse entrepreneurs. And in those clips, you saw a gentleman by the name of Gary Valesky, right? Your battalion commander today, Lieutenant General Gary Valesky, commander of I Corps at Joint Base Lewis McChord. And I have a leadership-related question. I believe leadership is learned. I believe we learn leadership every day by observing those leaders in their natural habitat and determining what we want to copy or emulate versus what we want to discard, right? So I'd like for you guys to share just a little bit on your own. How did leadership matter that day, especially Lieutenant General Valesky's leadership?
He was stuck out in a building in sector, so he didn't get a chance to see him much. But Colonel Valesky is an amazing person and an amazing leader. I was very fortunate to have my first combat engagement of the man. He has an amazing ability to not sugarcoat, to candy coat anything, and you're going to do it the right way, whether it's hard or not, doesn't matter. And you could get so angry at him sometimes, like, I cannot believe that we are going in here and just kick the hornet's nest the way that we are. And then you're like, man, I'm going to tell him something the next time I see him. And so you're sitting in the chow hall, and before you see him, he sees you and comes and sits down next to you. And 5 minutes later, you're laughing and joking because the whole tenseness out of the atmosphere has changed just because he's the kind of leader to come in and sit down with you and bear the exact same burden that you were bearing and to lead from the front. And so I made it a point in my subsequent deployment to try to mimic a little bit more of what he showed and some of the other leaders that I was fortunate enough to work with that day.
I was stuck up on the roof, and I've been trying to think of a good answer to say while Aaron was talking. One of the things that's always been remarkable to me, and that I'll never forget, is I was a young E5. I'd just been promoted a couple months before, if I remember correctly. And on that patrol, I didn't have my squad with me. I didn't have a whole lot of people because we only had so many seats that were available in the trucks to get out there. But with that being said, I was kicking in doors and leading guys who'd been in the Army for maybe 5-6 months. And they were all trained as drivers or as crewmen for vehicles. They'd had previous training on how to enter a building and establish a foothold and occupy it, but no real world experience, much like me. But through the leadership that we had throughout the company, the battalion, within the platoon, they were able to face the odds and able to make it through all of that and go into those doors without asking questions just because they were trained properly. And it's just a trickle-down effect, that we're all a sum of the training that we received, and we can only be as good as around us. And that was the reason why we were so fantastic that day, is because I was surrounded by fantastic people.
Thank you so much. Can we please give our panel a round of applause?
Yes, and I wanted to thank you guys again, and we do want to show you one more clip. Unfortunately, not of the long run home. You're going to have to wait until November 7th to see all of that. But we do want to show you a clip from the Chain of Command, or a trailer for Chain of Command, which is also from National Geographic, and I think just continues to demonstrate their commitment to really showing the military experience in a very authentic way.
Everything we do or fail to do will have effects. But at the end of the day, we can't be paralyzed by tough choices.
Defeat of violent extremism, that's a tough task.
In Iraq, the ongoing battle for the second city of Mosul could result in the worst humanitarian catastrophe in the war against so-called Islamic State.
We've got to defeat their narrative. We've got to defeat their ideology.
It's only a matter of time before the threat of terrorism anywhere becomes a threat of terrorism everywhere.
You stay here at home.
I wanted to, baby, but Mommy has to go to work, okay?
No.
Mommy and Daddy are gonna get in big trouble if we don't go to work, okay?
This crew here is the tip of the spear with respect to managing the battle space. If they're out there, they ought to be scared.
Just as it's a global threat, it requires a global response.
We have to be more than partners. We have to be friends, and then we have to be brothers.
Hold on! Run!
Oh,
Hi.
baby, you have the doll.
Hi, Andrew. How you doing, buddy?
We get to strike.
ammunition flows through here. This place is critical.
Now I want it to be November. What about you guys? I'm like, can we have it today? Special release just for us. We won't tell anyone. Let's thank our panel again. How fantastic were them. Thank you so much for being here.